This partnership is terminated." The foreign executive's voice was ice. Papers rustled as he prepared to leave Sterling Corporation's grandest boardroom. Victor Albright, head of international operations, paled the billion-dollar deal evaporating before his eyes. Suddenly, a clear, calm voice sliced through the suffocating tension. In perfect, unaccented Japanese, Tanaka-sama said Evelyn Reed, the new director, whose previous role was pushing a mop. "With respect is your company's deepest concern, truly the risk outlined, or the magnitude of the opportunity you might be walking away from." Mr. Tanaka froze mid-stride, his hand hovering over his briefcase. His hardened expression slowly cracked disbelief, warring with a dawning intrigue. Beside him, Victor Albright, visibly choked, spinning to stare at Evelyn as if she'd sprouted wings. Who was this woman? And how did she just command a room that had seconds before belonged to failure? It's in moments like these, when the unspoken suddenly finds its voice, that entire futures can be rewritten. If Evelyn's quiet audacity has you wondering what happens next, subscribe to unravel her full journey and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe gives someone the power to leave a whole office speechless? The hum of the fluorescent lights in the Sterling Corporation tower was a familiar lullaby to Evelyn Reed, or perhaps more accurately, a nightly serenade that accompanied her waltz with a mop and bucket. 3 a.m. The city of Chicago sprawled beneath the panoramic windows of the executive floor, a glittering carpet of distant dreams and hurried lives, mostly oblivious to the woman who kept its corporate temples clean. Evelyn, or Eva, as she preferred in the quiet company of her own thoughts, moved with an economy of motion born from years of this nocturnal ballet. Her short dark hair, streaked with distinguished silver that mirrored the city's own subtle aging, was pulled back neatly. Tonight her hands, though calloused from work, moved with a practiced grace as she polished the imposing mahogany table in the main conference room. As she worked, her lips moved almost imperceptibly, shaping sounds that bore no resemblance to the English that echoed through these halls by day. La concordance des temps, a crucial, if rather dramatic, element of French grammar. None she murmured to the gleaming surface, her reflection a fleeting shadow. A faint smile touched her lips. It was her little rebellion, this silent symphony of tongues she conducted in the empty spaces of power. 10 languages, she carried them within her, like precious hidden jewels, each with its own cadence, its own soul. They were her companions in the long, quiet hours. Just last week, a new security guard, young enough to be her son, had rounded the corner as she was meticulously dusting Arthur Sterling's formidable oak desk, softly reciting a line from a Rilke poem in its original German. Wer wenn ich schrie, hörte mich denn aus der Engel Ordnungen. The guard, a fresh-faced young man named Billy, had stopped, his brow furrowed. "Everything all right, ma'am. You—" Saying something, Evelyn had simply offered him a gentle, almost maternal smile. "Just chasing away the dust bunnies, Billy." They seemed to respond better to a firm, multilingual approach. Billy had just blinked, nodded slowly, and continued his rounds, likely chalking it up to the eccentricities of the night shift. Eva chuckled softly at the memory. If only he knew the dust bunnies were the least of the things she could command with her words. Her life hadn't always been a tapestry of hushed corridors and the scent of industrial cleaner. There had been a time of lecture halls, of passionate debates about semantics and etymology, a master's program half completed. Then life, as it so often does, had presented a different curriculum, one of sacrifice, of responsibilities that had quietly, insistently steered her down a different path. Her daughter, now a successful architect in her own right, living on the West Coast, was a testament to those choices. No regrets, Evelyn often told herself, just a different unfolding. And still the languages remained. A vibrant, secret garden she tended in the sterile soil of her routine. She often found a wry amusement in the corporate jargon she'd overhear snippets of during her early evening prep work, before the offices fully emptied. Leveraging synergies, optimizing deliverables, circle back. It all sounded so needlessly complicated, so much puffery compared to the elegant precision of a well-turned Arabic phrase or the lyrical flow of Italian. She'd once found a discarded memo outlining a paradigm shift in client engagement and had idly translated the entire pompous document into flawless, concise Swahili. In her head, a small, private smile playing on her lips. The Swahili version she'd thought was far more persuasive. Miles above her, in the penthouse office that bore his name, Arthur Sterling stared out at the same city, but his view was anything but peaceful. At 55, he was at the helm of a global logistics empire, a titan of industry. Yet tonight, the city lights seemed to mock his recent string of frustrations. A major expansion into the Middle Eastern market was stalling, mired in what his team vaguely described as cultural misalignments and communication nuances. His vice president of international operations. Victor Albright, a man who prided himself on efficiency and data, seemed utterly incapable of bridging these so-called nuances. Millions were on the line, and Arthur felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He ran a hand through his own silver-threaded hair, the weight of Sterling Corp heavy on his shoulders. He'd built this company from the ground up, prided himself on a global vision, on understanding the pulse of international trade. Yet here they were fumbling. They had translators, of course, expensive ones, but something was always lost, some vital spark of connection that couldn't be found in a dictionary or a language app. He needed more than just words translated. He needed understanding, true rapport. Victor had suggested another consultant, another hefty fee. Arthur sighed, turning from the window. The solution felt elusive, like a word on the tip of his tongue he couldn't quite grasp. He decided to walk to clear his head. The elevator descended smoothly, its quiet hum a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. He often found a strange solace in the building. During these late hours, the usually bustling corridors now silent, expectant. He wasn't heading for the exit, not yet. Sometimes just a change of scenery within his own domain helped. He found himself on one of the lower administrative floors, the air cooler here, the lighting a shade less forgiving. As he passed a darkened alcove near the custodial supply bay, a sound drifted out so faint he almost missed it. It wasn't English. It was melodic rich, with unfamiliar inflections, yet spoken with an undeniable articulate fluency. He couldn't place the language immediately. Was it Farsi Urdu, perhaps? It was too brief, just a fragment of a sentence. But the precision, the clarity, it stopped him. It wasn't the language itself that was so startling, but the context. Here, at this hour, from what sounded like the service area, a flicker of something, curiosity, pierced through his fatigue. He paused, listening, but the sound was gone, replaced only by the distant rhythmic hum of the building itself, breathing in the deep of the night. Arthur frowned. It was probably nothing a radio left on, perhaps. Still for a moment, the brief alien melody hung in the air, an unexpected note in the otherwise predictable silence of his sleeping empire. The memory of that fleeting, melodious sound from the service alcove tugged at Arthur Sterling's mind throughout the next day. It was an incongruous detail in the otherwise meticulously ordered world of Sterling Corp, a whisper of the unexpected. He found himself against his better judgment, altering his typically rigid late-evening routine. Instead of heading straight to his private elevator, He took a detour, a manufactured reason to pass through the lower administrative floors, around the time he'd heard the snippet of strange language. He told himself it was merely a CEO's due diligence, an awareness of the building's nocturnal rhythms. But a deeper, unacknowledged curiosity propelled him. For 2 nights his detour yielded nothing but the familiar, quiet hum and the distant clatter of cleaning carts. He almost dismissed the incident. Then, on the 3rd night, as he rounded the corridor leading towards the East Wing offices, he heard it again. This time it wasn't a mere fragment. It was a full, flowing conversation. Evelyn Reed was standing near a large potted fern in a rarely used reception area, her cleaning cart parked discreetly beside her. Her back was mostly to him. She was speaking into a simple older model cell phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but clear, imbued with an effortless cadence. The language was undeniably Arabic classical, and articulate the kind he'd heard in formal discussions with dignitaries from Dubai and Riyadh. There was a warmth in her tone, a gentle persuasion, then a soft, melodious laugh. She gestured with one hand, a small expressive movement, as if the person on the other end could see her. Arthur stopped concealed by the angle of the corridor. He wasn't just hearing words. He was witnessing a complete, nuanced interaction. This was no radio left on. This was a woman, his night shift janitor, conducting a conversation in flawless Arabic with the ease of a native speaker. He felt a jolt, a profound sense of dissonance that was almost dizzying. His mind, accustomed to spreadsheets and market projections, struggled to reconcile the image of Evelyn Reed, the quiet woman who polished his desk with the sophisticated linguist on the phone. She concluded her call with a soft, "Ma ya salama," and a smile that lingered for a moment after she'd hung up. As she turned, perhaps sensing a presence, or maybe just moving on to her next task, she saw him. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a professional composure. She straightened her hands, finding each other in front of her. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice, now the quiet, respectful English he was accustomed to. "Good evening. I didn't realize anyone was still on this floor." Arthur stepped forward, his expression a mixture of astonishment and carefully managed neutrality. "Good evening, Evelyn," he replied, his voice a little more hoarse than he intended. He gestured vaguely towards where she'd been standing. That was quite a conversation. A faint blush rose on Evelyn's cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "Just a personal call, sir. My apologies if I disturbed you." "No, not at all," Arthur said quickly. "It wasn't the call itself. It was the language. Arabic, wasn't it?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes, sir. A friend from overseas." He took another step closer, his curiosity now a palpable force. "You speak it remarkably well. Flawlessly, in fact." He remembered his own clumsy attempts at pleasantries during business trips, the carefully memorized phrases that always felt stiff and inadequate. The contrast was stark. His internal monologue was already having a field day. And here I thought my bonjour comment ça va, after 3 years of high school French, was something to write home about. Evelyn offered a small, almost apologetic smile. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I've had some practice." "Some practice," Arthur echoed, a hint of incredulity in his tone. "Evelyn, may I ask, how many languages do you speak?" She hesitated for a moment, as if mentally cataloguing them. Then she looked at him directly, her expression open, devoid of any artifice. 10, sir." Fluently. Arthur Sterling, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile takeovers, found himself for a rare moment utterly speechless. 10. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. He felt his mind recalibrating, trying to process this new, astounding piece of information. The woman who cleaned his office, who navigated these silent halls with a mop and a spray bottle, was a polyglot of extraordinary caliber. 10 languages, he finally repeated the words, feeling inadequate. "You're telling me you're fluent in 10 distinct languages?" "Yes, sir." Evelyn confirmed, her voice, still quiet, almost matter-of-fact. There was no trace of arrogance, no hint of boasting, just a simple statement of truth. He stared at her, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. The most prominent, the one that almost escaped his lips, was a blunt, incredulous why. Why was someone with such an astonishing gift, such a rare and valuable skill, spending her nights in the solitary, thankless task of cleaning offices? Instead, he managed. "That's quite an accomplishment, Evelyn. Is it difficult managing all of them?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips, a flicker of the dry wit he was beginning to sense beneath her quiet exterior. "Well, Mr. Sterling," she said, her eyes briefly twinkling, "I suppose keeping the subjunctive mood straight in Spanish can be more demanding than this stubborn scuff mark on the hallway linoleum. But one manages." Arthur almost laughed. The sheer understated absurdity of it, the profound disconnect between her abilities and her current role, was beginning to feel less like a shock and more like a puzzle, a complex equation he was suddenly determined to solve. He saw not just a janitor, but a woman of hidden depths, of a quiet, formidable intellect. The brief, melodious sound he'd heard a few nights ago was no longer just an anomaly. It was a clue, a single, perfect note hinting at an entire hidden orchestra. He nodded slowly, his mind racing. The issues with the Middle Eastern expansion, the communication gaps, Victor Albright's frustrations. A new, unexpected variable had just entered the equation. "Evelyn," he said, his voice now carrying a different timbre, one of focused intensity. "I find myself very intrigued, more than intrigued." He needed to understand. He needed to know how such brilliance had come to reside unseen in the quiet corners of his own company. The night which had begun with the weight of unresolved business problems suddenly felt charged with a new electrifying possibility. The revelation of Evelyn Reed's linguistic arsenal played on Arthur Sterling's mind like a persistent, captivating melody. 10 languages, flawlessly. It was the kind of human capital headhunters dreamed of, the sort of asset consulting firms charged fortunes to provide. And she was, at this very moment, likely ensuring the spotless state of the 4th-floor men's restroom. The incongruity was a pebble in his shoe, a constant irritating reminder of something fundamentally misaligned within his own organization. He made a casual inquiry the next afternoon with Gary, the custodial supervisor for the evening shift. Gary, a man whose kind eyes had seen decades of corporate life from the unique vantage point of its after-hours, was genuinely perplexed by Arthur's sudden interest in Evelyn Reed, beyond her punctuality and thoroughness. "Ava O. She's a good one, Mr. Sterling. Quiet, keeps to herself, mostly. Never a complaint, not in all the years she's been with us." "Why is there an issue?" Sir Gary's brow furrowed with a touch of concern. Arthur offered a reassuring smile. "No issue at all, Gary. Just updating some employee records. She's a long-term employee, wanted to make sure everything was in order." He knew it was a flimsy excuse. Gary, however, accepted it readily enough. "Oh, right you are, sir. Yeah, Eva's solid. Always on time does her work. Doesn't say much, but then again, not many of 'em do at that hour. Guess you could say she's reliably invisible." He chuckled a good-natured sound, utterly unaware of the irony that made Arthur's smile feel a little strained. Reliably invisible, Arthur repeated to himself later. That he was beginning to understand was precisely the problem. The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of timing. 2 days later, a minor crisis erupted. A delegation from a highly sought-after Norwegian tech firm, crucial for a new joint venture Sterling Corp was aggressively pursuing, announced they were arriving a full day ahead of schedule. Their advance team was already en route to the airport. The problem, the lead negotiator, a notoriously particular gentleman, named Knudsen had a last-minute non-negotiable demand. All preliminary discussions regarding certain proprietary algorithms had to be conducted only in Norwegian, with no third-party digital translation software present, citing security concerns. Sterling Corp's go-to Norwegian translator was unfortunately on a remote fishing trip in Iceland, utterly unreachable. Panic flickered through the international division. Victor Albright, Arthur's usually composed head of international operations, appeared in Arthur's office, looking flustered, a sheen of sweat on his brow, despite the cool office air. "Arthur, we have a situation," Victor began, his voice tight. "The Norwegians are practically landing, and Knudsen is insisting on, well, Norwegian only. It's absurd, but he's adamant. We're trying to find another interpreter, but on such short notice for this level of technical discussion." He trailed off, a rare admission of defeat in his tone. Arthur listened, his expression unreadable. 10 languages. The words echoed in his mind. It was a gamble, a monumental one. Bringing in a janitor, regardless of her hidden talents, to a high-stakes preliminary negotiation, the potential for disaster, for ridicule, was immense. Yet, that calm, confident voice, speaking flawless Arabic, replayed in his memory. The dry wit, the quiet intelligence. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Victor," he said slowly, "I may have an unconventional solution. Highly unconventional." Victor Albright blinked. "At this point, Arthur, I'm open to just about anything that isn't summoning the ghost of a Viking translator." A short while later, Arthur Sterling stood outside Conference Room 7B, where the early arriving Norwegian contingent, looking stern and jet-lagged, were being served coffee by a visibly nervous junior executive. He'd found Evelyn on the service level, methodically restocking a supply cart. He'd explained the situation, briefly, concisely. He'd seen the surprise in her eyes, the slight hesitation. He'd also seen a flicker of something else, a spark, a challenge accepted. "Norwegian, sir," she'd asked, her voice calm as ever. "Yes, I'm quite comfortable with it. The Bergen dialect can be a little tricky with its tonal patterns, but standard Bokmål is straightforward enough." Arthur had simply nodded, a knot of tension and anticipation coiling in his stomach. Good. They're waiting. Now he watched as Evelyn Reed, dressed in her usual neat, unassuming janitorial uniform, a detail he hadn't had time to even consider changing, stepped into the conference room. She carried a small, discreet notepad and a pen. She offered a polite, brief nod to the Norwegians, then to Arthur and Victor, who hovered near the doorway, looking as if he expected the ceiling to collapse. "Ta de force." Knudsen, a portly man with a formidable white beard and eyes like chips of Nordic ice, looked at Evelyn, then at Arthur, a silent, disdainful question in his gaze. Mr. Sterling Knudsen began in heavily accented English, his voice a low rumble. "I believe I was clear about my requirements for this preliminary discussion." Before Arthur could speak, Evelyn stepped forward just slightly. "God ettermiddag, Herr Knudsen, mina herrar," she said, her voice resonating with a warm, clear confidence. Her Norwegian was perfect, the intonation precise, the vowels and consonants shaped with an authenticity that made even Arthur, who knew only a handful of phrases, sit up straighter. "Det är en ära och önske. Dem välkommen till Sterling Corporation. Jag heter Evelyn Reed och jag vill bistå med översättelsen idag. Good afternoon, Mr. Knudsen, gentlemen. It is an honor to welcome you to Sterling Corporation. My name is Evelyn Reed, and I will be assisting with the translation today." The effect was instantaneous. Knudsen's frosty expression wavered, replaced by a look of startled, grudging respect. His colleagues exchanged surprised glances. Victor Albright's jaw, Arthur noted with a flicker of grim satisfaction, had visibly dropped. For the next hour, Evelyn was nothing short of extraordinary. She didn't just translate, she navigated the complex technical jargon with ease, clarified nuances, and even at one point subtly diffused a moment of potential misunderstanding with a perfectly timed, culturally sensitive anecdote in Norwegian that actually drew a rare chuckle from Mr. Knudsen. She was a bridge conduit of understanding, operating with a grace and intelligence that was utterly captivating. As the preliminary discussion concluded, far more productively than Arthur had dared hope, Mr. Knudsen rose. He approached Evelyn, bypassing Arthur for a moment, and addressed her directly, in Norwegian, a lengthy, earnest stream of words. Evelyn listened intently, then replied with equal gravity. Knudsen then turned to Arthur, a broad, almost boyish grin now splitting his beard. "Mr. Sterling," he boomed, switching to English, his demeanor utterly transformed. "This woman, this Evelyn Reed, she is a treasure. More astute than any three of your regular department heads I've dealt with in the past, no offense intended to Mr. Albright here." He clapped Victor, who still looked rather dazed, on the shoulder. Her grasp of our technical specificities, her understanding of our, let us say, direct manner of speaking, remarkable. Where on earth did you find her? Is your entire janitorial staff this encyclopedically gifted? Perhaps I should offer them all positions at my firm in Oslo. Arthur Sterling looked at Evelyn Reed, who was now quietly collecting the used water glasses from the table, her composure as serene as ever. A profound realization settled over him, a truth both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. His company, his global multi-million-dollar enterprise, had been operating with a blind spot the size of a continent. All this time, while they'd been wrestling with communication nuances and cultural misalignments, the solution had been silently polishing the floors beneath their feet. The cost of that oversight, he suddenly understood, was likely incalculable. Evelyn caught his eye and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. For the first time, Arthur felt a genuine, unreserved smile spread across his own face. The game, he realized, had just changed, and Evelyn Reed, whether she knew it yet or not, held some very interesting new cards. The Norwegian incident, as it quickly became known in Arthur Sterling's private thoughts, was more than just a fortunate save. It was a glaring spotlight on a systemic failure. For days, Arthur found himself observing the ebb and flow of his company with new eyes. He saw the missed connections, the subtle frictions in international dealings, the sheer unacknowledged cost of not having someone like Evelyn Reed at the forefront of their global strategy. The realization was a quiet burn in his gut. Sterling Corp, for all its power and reach, had been navigating the complex waters of international business with one hand tied behind its back. And the solution hadn't been in expensive consultants or new software. She had been there all along, a silent testament to their collective blindness. He spent a weekend sequestered in his home study, not with spreadsheets, but with a blank notepad, sketching out an idea that felt both radical and undeniably right. This wasn't about finding a slightly better role for a talented employee. This was about fundamentally rethinking how Sterling Corp engaged with the world. On Monday morning, he summoned an emergency meeting of his senior executive team. The atmosphere in the boardroom was thick with unspoken questions. Arthur Sterling was not a man given to sudden, unexplained convocations. Victor Albright, head of international operations, sat ramrod straight, his expression carefully neutral, though a slight tick near his eye betrayed his unease. He'd been noticeably subdued since the Norwegian affair, his usual confident pronouncements replaced by a wary silence whenever intercultural matters were discussed. Arthur's executive assistant, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, distributed agendas that contained only one cryptic item: strategic realignment of global communications. Arthur began his voice, calm but carrying an undeniable weight. He spoke of the evolving global landscape, the increasing complexity of cross-cultural commerce, and the recent challenges Sterling Corp had faced. For too long he stated his gaze, sweeping across the polished table. We've treated language as a mere technical hurdle, something to be outsourced or patched over with expensive, often impersonal translation services. We've focused on the words gentlemen and ladies, but we've consistently missed the music. He let that sink in for a moment. We've overlooked the profound strategic advantage of genuine, nuanced, in-house, intercultural expertise. The kind of expertise that doesn't just translate a contract, but understands the heartbeat of a negotiation, the unspoken context of a business relationship. He paused, then looked directly at his team. I recently became aware of an individual within this very organization who possesses this expertise to an extraordinary degree, an individual whose capabilities in this arena frankly dwarf anything I have encountered in my 30 years in this business. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. Victor Albright shifted uncomfortably. This individual, Arthur continued, his voice firm, is currently employed as part of our night shift custodial staff. An audible hush fell over the boardroom. It was so sudden, so complete, it felt as if the air conditioning had momentarily ceased. Miss Davies' mid-sip of water froze her glass halfway to her lips. One senior VP, a portly man named Henderson, let out a small, involuntary sound like a deflating balloon. Victor Albright went visibly pale. Arthur pressed on, his resolve hardening at their collective shock. Her name is Evelyn Reed, and she speaks 10 languages, flawlessly. He saw the looks of disbelief, the exchanged glances. I am not exaggerating. I have witnessed it myself. She has already, in an informal capacity, averted a significant diplomatic incident and salvaged a multi-million-dollar negotiation for this company. He let that statement hang, then delivered his masterstroke. Therefore, effective immediately, I am creating a new executive division, the Department of Global Intercultural Strategy, and I am appointing Evelyn Reed as its inaugural director. If the previous silence had been profound, this one was concussive. For a solid 10 seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. It was as if Arthur had announced the company was relocating to the moon. Director Ann, Executive Division. 4. A janitor. The unspoken questions screamed in the void. Arthur then nodded to Miss Davies. Please ask Miss Reed to join us. A few minutes later, Evelyn Reed walked into the boardroom. She was still in her neat, practical work attire, having been discreetly intercepted by Miss Davies just as her pre-shift preparations were ending. She looked around at the stunned faces, her own expression calm, but tinged with a natural apprehension. She had been told only that Mr. Sterling wished to see her. Arthur gestured to an empty chair beside him, a chair usually occupied by a top-tier executive. Evelyn, please. Join us. She sat her posture poised, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at Arthur, a silent question in her eyes. Evelyn, Arthur said, his voice, now softer, but still carrying the authority that had just upended their corporate hierarchy. I've just informed the executive team of my decision. I've created a new directorship, heading a vital new department focused on our global communications and cultural engagement. A role that requires exceptional linguistic talent, deep cultural understanding, and strategic thinking. A role, Evelyn, that I believe you are uniquely and brilliantly qualified to fill. I am offering you the position of Director of Global Intercultural Strategy for Sterling Corporation." Evelyn Reed stared at him. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. The only thought that managed to pierce through the sudden roaring silence in her own mind was a ridiculously mundane one. "But who will make sure the geraniums in Mr. Henderson's office get their Friday watering?" It was so absurd, so out of place, with the monumental offer hanging in the air, that a tiny hysterical bubble of something akin to laughter almost escaped her. She swallowed hard. Around the table the executives were a tableau of frozen disbelief. Victor Albright looked as though he'd swallowed a particularly bitter lemon. Henderson was openly gaping. Miss Davies's pen had in fact clattered onto her notepad. They were to a person utterly and profoundly speechless. The painful truth, as Arthur saw it, wasn't just that Evelyn was qualified. It was that an entire system, an entire corporate culture he himself had built, had been so blind for so long. This wasn't just about one woman's promotion. It was about shattering a paradigm. Evelyn finally found her voice a quiet tremor in the charged atmosphere. "Mr. Sterling, a director," she managed, the title feeling alien on her tongue. I don't have the usual qualifications. The degrees—" Arthur met her gaze, his own unwavering. "Evelyn," he said, his voice resonating with a conviction that seemed to fill the room. "You have 10 languages. You have intelligence, Grace, and a proven ability to connect where others have failed. As for qualifications, you, Ms. Reed, are about to redefine them for this entire company." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer just shock. It was the sound of an old world cracking and a new one, uncertain but undeniably potent, beginning to take shape right before their astonished eyes. The boardroom door clicked shut behind the last of the stunned executives, leaving Evelyn Reed alone with Arthur Sterling. The silence that descended was different now, less about shock and more about the colossal weight of the moment. Evelyn sat, her hands still clasped in her lap, her mind a dizzying kaleidoscope of images. Her daughter's graduation, the worn covers of her beloved language textbooks, the endless gleaming corridors of Sterling Corp at 3 a.m., the faint scent of ammonia and floor wax that had been her constant companion for over a decade. Director of Global Intercultural Strategy. The title felt like a garment sewn for a stranger, magnificent, but utterly foreign. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I truly don't know what to say." The image of the geraniums in Mr. Henderson's office inexplicably floated back into her mind. Who would water them now? It was a ridiculous anchor to a life that had, in the span of an hour, been irrevocably unmoored. Arthur Sterling regarded her with a surprisingly gentle expression. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to see not just the janitor, or even the newly minted director, but the woman beneath. "Evelyn," he said, his voice calm. "I understand this is a great deal to absorb. Perhaps more than a great deal. It's just—" She struggled for words. "I'm a janitor, sir. I clean floors. I change trash bags. This is a world away from that." The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. Fear of failure, certainly, but also a deeper, more insidious fear. The fear of being seen, truly seen, after so many years of cultivating a quiet invisibility. What if the woman they saw wasn't enough? What if the languages, her secret pride, weren't sufficient armor in this new, alien battlefield of boardrooms and global strategy? This was the heart of her imposter syndrome, a voice whispering that she was playing a role she hadn't earned. "You are also," Arthur countered gently, "a woman who speaks 10 languages, with a fluency and an intuitive understanding that has already saved this company a significant amount of trouble, and potentially a great deal of money. You possess a mind, Evelyn, that can bridge worlds. That is not a qualification one finds listed on a resume. It's a gift, a rare one." He leaned forward. "I am not offering you this position out of charity or as some grand experiment. I am offering it because in my considered judgment, you are the most qualified person for this vital role, the only person I suspect." He spoke of his vision for the new department, of the impact she could have. He acknowledged there would be challenges, adjustments, perhaps even resistance. "But I will support you, Evelyn," he concluded. "Sterling Corporation will support you. The question is, are you willing to support yourself in this, to believe, as I do, in what you are capable of?" His words, his unwavering belief, were like a steady hand offered in a storm. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just a boss, but a man who had, for some inexplicable reason, seen past the uniform, past the years of silence, and glimpsed the woman she had almost forgotten she could be. The choice was terrifying, but the thought of returning to the silent anonymity of the night shift, now that this door had been thrown open, felt even more so. Meanwhile, news of Arthur Sterling's revolutionary appointment was spreading through Sterling Corp with the speed and destructive power of a digital wildfire. By lunchtime, it was the only topic of conversation in every break room, every cubicle farm, every hushed executive corridor. Gary Evelyn's former supervisor was accosted near the vending machines by a group of wide-eyed administrative assistants. "Gary, is it true about Ava?" one of them whispered, as if uttering a state secret. Gary, a man of simple pleasures and straightforward views, just scratched his head, a bewildered but proud grin spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be," he chuckled. "Always knew Eva was a smart cookie. Just last week she was helping me with a crossword puzzle, and darned if she didn't fill in a clue with some fancy Latin word. Said it meant deeds, not words. Guess she was on to something, eh?" He beamed. "Director Ava. Got a nice ring to it, don't it?" The reactions elsewhere were more complex. Amongst some of the younger staff and those in more junior positions, there was a buzz of excitement, a sense of possibility. If Ava, the quiet janitor, could be recognized like this, then perhaps talent, real talent, could indeed be found anywhere. Perhaps their own unseen efforts might one day be noticed. But in the mid to upper echelons, the mood was decidedly more mixed. Whispers turned to mutters, then to hushed, indignant conferences behind closed office doors. 10 languages as a janitor. One marketing manager was heard to hiss. "And Sterling just hands her an executive role. What about those of us who've paid our dues, who have the MBAs, the certifications?" Another more imaginative soul was overheard theorizing in hushed tones. "I'm telling you, she's got something on him. Maybe she found some secret documents in the trash. Or she hypnotized him with ancient Egyptian chants during a late-night cleaning session. Victor Albright, initially struck dumb in the boardroom, had regained his composure. But it was a brittle, icy kind of calm. He didn't voice his objections openly, not yet. But his curt nods, his dismissive wave of the hand when the topic arose, spoke volumes. He was a man of process, of established hierarchies. This was anarchy, an affront to the natural order of corporate assent. He made a mental note to review Evelyn Reed's personnel file. There had to be something, some logical explanation, or some disqualifying factor that Sterling, in his sudden fit of whatever this was, had overlooked. The ripples eventually reached the highest levels. Eleanor Vance, a formidable senior board member based in Dallas, a woman whose tenure with Sterling Corp predated Arthur's own ascent to CEO, received a rather agitated call from one of her nervous protégés within the company. Eleanor, known for her sharp intellect, her even sharper tongue, and her unwavering focus on shareholder value, listened in stony silence. "A janitor," she finally interjected, her voice like ice cracking. "Arthur has appointed a janitor to an executive directorship with a new department created just for her based on an alleged linguistic aptitude." She paused. "Tell me Henderson has Arthur finally taken leave of his senses, or is this some elaborate, ill-conceived attempt at a public relations stunt?" Henderson stammered something about Mr. Sterling's conviction about the Norwegian incident. Conviction is one thing, Henderson Eleanor Vance cut in smoothly. Fiscal responsibility and adherence to proven corporate governance are quite another. "I believe I need to have a rather pointed conversation with our CEO." And perhaps she added a dangerous silkiness in her tone with this Ms. Evelyn Reed as well. Back in Chicago, Evelyn Reed, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, took a deep breath. The fear was still there, a cold tremor in her soul. But beneath it something else was stirring, a flicker. Faint, almost forgotten, but undeniably present. Hope. And with it, the first tentative stirring of a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She looked at the reflection of a stranger in the polished gleam of Arthur Sterling's now empty office window. A stranger who looked remarkably like her, but with a new, uncertain light in her eyes. The choice, she realized, had already begun to make itself. The following morning, Evelyn Reed walked through the gleaming glass doors of Sterling Corporation, not as a shadow navigating the pre-dawn quiet, but as a woman stepping into an entirely new and frankly terrifying dimension. She'd called Arthur Sterling late the previous night, her voice a mixture of trepidation and a resolve that surprised even herself, and accepted his offer. The words, Director of Global Intercultural Strategy, still felt like an elaborate costume she was trying on for size. Her new office on the 17th floor, a significant jump from the basement-level custodial domain, was modest by executive standards, but to Evelyn it felt like a palace. It had a window, a real window overlooking the bustling city she had only ever seen, reflected in polished floors. Arthur had ensured a new computer, a stack of fresh notepads and a sleek telephone were waiting. He'd also assigned a temporary administrative assistant, a bright, slightly overeager intern named Leo Carter. Leo, bless his young heart, seemed to view Evelyn as a combination of a rediscovered historical artifact and a corporate superhero. "Ms. Reed, good morning," he chirped, nearly tripping over a wastebasket in his enthusiasm. "I've taken the liberty of organizing your incoming correspondence by potential linguistic complexity, and I've alphabetized your paperclips. Is that helpful for international diplomacy?" Evelyn couldn't help but smile. "Leo," she said, her voice gentle, "your initiative is commendable. Perhaps we can focus on the correspondence first." His earnestness was a small, welcome island of warmth in the sea of uncertainty she felt. She made a mental note about the comfort of her new ergonomic chair. This is certainly an upgrade from the overturned bucket in the supply closet, she thought, a wry smile touching her lips. "And the view is better, though I suspect there will be fewer interesting spiders up here." The first week was a blur of introductions, orientations, and the distinct unnerving sensation of being intensely scrutinized. Victor Albright, head of international operations, was a master of polite, almost imperceptible condescension. He'd brief Evelyn by inundating her with convoluted reports filled with acronyms and corporate jargon, so dense she suspected they were designed to obscure rather than illuminate. Ms. Reed, he'd said during one such session, a thin smile playing on his lips as he handed her a 50-page document on synergistic transcontinental logistical frameworks. "I trust your unique skill set will allow you to get up to speed on these foundational protocols swiftly." We wouldn't want any faux pas. In our strategic intercultural engagements, would-we Evelyn holding the dense report simply nodded. Thank you, Mr. Albright. I appreciate the thorough overview. I find that a clear understanding of foundational principles, regardless of the language they're presented in, is always key. Later that day, she'd mentally translated his entire preamble into perfectly rhyming limericks in Gaelic, just for her own amusement. The task of actually deciphering the report's true meaning, however, was more challenging than any linguistic puzzle she'd encountered. The real test, however, arrived in the form of a summons. Not from Arthur Sterling, but from Eleanor Vance. The senior board member had, as promised, flown in from Dallas. She didn't request a meeting. She granted one in a small, intimidatingly quiet conference room on the executive floor, a room Evelyn had previously only ever cleaned. Eleanor Vance was exactly as formidable as her reputation suggested, impeccably dressed, with eyes that missed nothing, and a presence that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. She didn't offer Evelyn a seat immediately, instead studying her for a long, appraising moment, as if examining a curious specimen. Ms. Reed Eleanor began her voice, a low, cultured drawl that held no warmth. Mr. Sterling has embarked on a rather unconventional personnel decision, one that has raised a few eyebrows on the board, mine included. She gestured curtly to a chair. Sit. Evelyn sat her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She met Eleanor's gaze without flinching. You were a janitor, Eleanor stated, not as a question, but as an indictment. For 13 years, you possess no MBA, no advanced degree in international business, no track record in corporate management. And yet you are now a director, heading a newly created department. Explain this. Anomaly to me. Evelyn took a quiet breath. Mrs. Vance. She began her voice even and clear. It is true that my formal corporate experience is non-existent. However, for over 2 decades, I have dedicated myself to the study and understanding of languages and cultures, 10 of them to be precise. I understand not just what is said, but often what is meant. I understand the nuances that can make or break a deal, the cultural sensitivities that can build or destroy trust. Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. And you believe this hobby qualifies you to direct global strategy for $1 billion corporation? Language is not a hobby for me, Mrs. Vance, Evelyn replied, a new firmness in her tone. It is a discipline, a lens through which I perceive the world. As for qualifications, Mr. Sterling recently entrusted me with an urgent negotiation with Norwegian partners when our official channels had failed. I believe the outcome speaks for itself. We secured the preliminary agreement. Ah, yes. The Norwegian incident, Eleanor said, a faint, dismissive smile on her lips. A fortunate confluence of circumstances, perhaps. One success does not a strategist make, Ms. Reed. Perhaps not, Evelyn conceded. But consider also the stalled expansion into the Qatari market. The reports cited irreconcilable cultural differences and communication deadlocks. I spent 2 days reviewing the correspondence, the transcripts of previous meetings. The problem wasn't a lack of willingness, Mrs. Vance. It was a series of subtle mistranslations, a misinterpretation of honorifics, and a failure to understand certain non-verbal cues that are paramount in Qatari business culture. Simple things, perhaps, to someone who understands, but profoundly damaging when overlooked. Eleanor Vance was silent for a moment, her sharp eyes fixed on Evelyn. This was not the flustered, out-of-her-depth employee she had perhaps expected. And you believe you can rectify this? Eleanor challenged. I believe I can provide the insights necessary for Mr. Albright's team to navigate it successfully, Evelyn corrected gently. My role, as I understand it, is not to replace, but to enhance, to bridge gaps that others may not even see. The meeting concluded without a clear victory for either side, but Evelyn left with her head held high. She had not been broken. She had spoken her truth, presented her case. Later that week, armed with Evelyn's detailed cultural briefing and key rephrased communication points, a call was arranged with the Qatari counterparts. Victor Albright, though still visibly skeptical, had no choice but to follow her recommendations. To his and many others' astonishment, the tone of the Qatari representatives shifted. The deadlocks began to ease. A new meeting was proposed, this time with a clear agenda for moving forward. Leo Carter, who had meticulously color-coded Evelyn's notes on Qatari business etiquette, blew for absolutely do not do this. Ms. Reed, red for essential for building trust, was ecstatic. You did it, Ms. Reed. They're actually talking again. Mr. Albright almost smiled. I think Evelyn allowed herself a small, genuine smile. It was a start, a small victory in a war of perception she hadn't asked for, but was now determined to win. The path ahead was still steep, lined with the Eleanor Vances and Victor Albrights of the corporate world. But for the first time in a very long time, Evelyn Reed felt the solid ground of her own capabilities beneath her feet, and it felt surprisingly like home. The success with the Qatari delegation was not a fluke. In the months that followed, Evelyn Reed, now firmly at the helm of the Department of Global Intercultural Strategy, became Sterling Corporation's secret weapon. She navigated a thorny trade dispute with a Korean conglomerate, her understanding of honorifics and subtle negotiation cues, turning a potential impasse into a surprisingly amicable agreement. She smoothed over a disastrous product launch in Brazil, not by rewriting marketing copy, but by identifying a core cultural disconnect in their initial campaign, something Victor Albright's team, for all their data analytics, had completely missed. Her department, initially a subject of skeptical whispers, slowly but surely became the one people turned to when all other avenues had failed. Victor Albright himself underwent a transformation that was in its own way as remarkable as Evelyn's. The initial frostiness gave way to a grudging observation, then to a reluctant, almost bewildered respect. He was seen on more than one occasion awkwardly attempting to incorporate phrases from Evelyn's cultural briefing notes into his own international calls, sometimes with mildly comical results. Ms. Reed, he'd once inquired, looking utterly perplexed, after a call with a new French supplier. I utilized the term joie de vivre, as you suggested, but I believe they thought I was discussing a new cheese. Is there a specific intonation? Evelyn, with her characteristic gentle patience, had simply smiled and offered a few pointers, never once betraying a hint of condescension. He even started attending the voluntary introductory language workshops Evelyn had quietly initiated for interested staff. The true turning point with the old guard came during the annual shareholder meeting. Sterling Corp had just secured a landmark partnership with a notoriously elusive Japanese tech consortium, a deal that had been on the brink of collapse for nearly a year. Arthur Sterling, in his address, made a point of detailing the intricate negotiations, highlighting the critical role played by a new strategic approach to intercultural understanding. He then invited Evelyn Reed to the podium to share a few insights. Evelyn, dressed in a simple but elegant business suit, a stark contrast to her former uniform, yet worn with the same quiet dignity, spoke for only 10 minutes. She didn't use corporate jargon. She spoke of respect, of listening, of the profound human connections that underpin all successful endeavors, regardless of language or culture. She shared an anecdote about finding common ground with the Japanese CEO through a shared appreciation for a little-known form of calligraphy, a detail no translator would have ever uncovered. When she finished, the usually staid assembly of shareholders gave her a spontaneous, heartfelt standing ovation. Eleanor Vance, seated in the front row, was seen dabbing discreetly at her eyes. Later she approached Evelyn during the reception. Miss Reed, Eleanor said, her voice softer than Evelyn had ever heard it. Your insights today were illuminating. You have brought a perspective to this company that I must admit we were sorely lacking. It wasn't an apology, not quite, but it was a clear, undeniable acknowledgement. A victory more significant than any single business deal. Inspired by Evelyn's journey and her undeniable impact, Arthur Sterling, with Evelyn, now a key advisor on the project, officially launched the Sterling Horizons Initiative. It was a company-wide program designed to identify, nurture, and provide pathways for overlooked internal talent, regardless of their current role or formal qualifications. Workshops on communication, cultural literacy, and even financial literacy for career advancement became commonplace. Leo Carter, Evelyn's enthusiastic former intern, was one of the first to benefit, securing a permanent position in Evelyn's expanding department, his knack for organizing paperclips now supplemented by a burgeoning understanding of global business etiquette. Arthur, during the initiative's launch event, joked, "We're now meticulously reviewing the hidden talents of all our staff. Who knows, our head of IT might be a concert pianist in disguise, and the cafeteria chef could very well be a chess grandmaster with a revolutionary new theory on supply chain management." The point is, he added his tone, becoming more serious. We will no longer wait for talent to accidentally reveal itself. We will actively seek it, nurture it, and celebrate it. The Sterling Corporation officers were no longer speechless with shock when Evelyn Reed's name was mentioned. Now they were often speechless with admiration or with the quiet inspiration that comes from witnessing genuine transformation. Evelyn became an unlikely mentor to many in her office, a place where people felt they could bring not just their business problems, but also their aspirations. She never forgot where she came from. Tucked away in a drawer of her modern executive desk, beside a framed photo of her smiling daughter, was a small, well-worn microfiber cleaning cloth, a simple, tangible reminder of the quiet dignity of all work and the long, winding road she had traveled. Evelyn Reed had found her voice, or perhaps had finally allowed the world to hear the many voices she had always carried within. She had redefined her future, yes, but in doing so, she had also subtly, profoundly begun to redefine the future of Sterling Corporation. Her peace was an earned peace, forged in resilience, validated by her contributions, and sweetened by the knowledge that her journey had opened doors for others. The city still sprawled beneath her 17th floor window, a glittering carpet of dreams. But now Evelyn Reed knew she was no longer just a silent observer of those dreams. She was an architect of them in her own unique, multilingual way, proving every day that the most extraordinary brilliance can often be found where you least expect it, waiting only for a chance to be seen and a voice ready to listen. And that, perhaps, was the most eloquent message of all. Evelyn Reed's story reminds us that brilliance often wears the quietest disguise, doesn't it? How many undiscovered talents walk among us, their potential waiting for just one person, one moment to offer the light it needs to bloom. Perhaps her journey from the shadows to a place of quiet influence mirrors a strength or a hidden gift within you, or someone you know. This story truly touched us, and we imagine it might have sparked some reflections for you too. What moment in Evelyn's transformation resonated most deeply with you? Or have you encountered an Evelyn in your life whose quiet strength changed your perspective? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your insights enrich this community. And because your voice matters to us, if you have ideas on how our future stories could be even more compelling, or any feedback on today's narrative that could help us improve, please do let us know. We truly value your input as we strive to bring you tales that connect. If Evelyn's journey to an earned peace moved you alike, would mean the world to us, and please consider sharing this story with others who might find inspiration within it. And to ensure you continue discovering stories that celebrate the human spirit and the power of seeing what's truly there, do subscribe and ring that notification bell for our future journeys together. Thank you for being with us. May you always find the extraordinary in the ordinary.